My name is Melinda Smith, and I'm in the Department of Political Science, and I coordinate the Department of Political Science speaker series, which is entitled Subaltern Voices, Speaking and Theorizing from the Disciplinary Margins. I'd like to welcome you to this talk by Dr. Sarah Percy from Oxford. Before I turn the floor over to Dr. Andy Knight, also in the Department of Political Science, and the coordinator of the Peace and Post-Conflict Certificate Program, which is co-sponsoring this talk, I'd like to just say a few words about the series and also about our sponsors. Well, first I would like to thank our sponsors, because as you know, a year-long series like this would not be possible without support from a number of sources. So quickly, if you bear with me, I'd like to thank, of course, the Department of Political Science and our chair, Dr. Linda Trimble, who is here, and associate chair, Dr. Lois Harder, who's also here. So thanks to the department. CRCs, Canada Research Chairs, also have contributed to this series. Dr. Janine Brody in Political Economy and Social Governance, and Dr. Anna Yateman as well. Thanks to the International Center, the Middle East and African Studies Program, the Faculty of Education, Augustana University, and Athabasca University as well. And this talk is part of a series of two talks that's going to be done by Dr. Percy, this one at 3:30. She's also speaking this evening at 3:30. So, sorry, 7:30 to 9 o'clock as part of a keynote for International Week, and that talk is entitled Strong Norm, Weak Law. It's 7:30 to 9 in Engineering, Teaching and Learning Complex, E1-003. And for those of you who want more information, it's in the International Week catalog. So I suspect that one will be as wonderful as I anticipate this one to be. As I said, the series is going on for the remainder of the term. And next week we have a series of speakers who will be talking about China and India and Africa in the global economies. That's next week, Thursday. But I would like to welcome you and thank you for coming to the speaker series. And I'd like to turn the floor over now to Dr. Andy Knight, who will introduce Dr. Percy.
Thank you very much, Melinda. And want to welcome you all to this part of the speaker series in our department. It so happens to coincide with International Week, and it's so good to see so many people out at the International Week events. Dr. Sarah Percy, as you know, was educated in Canada at Queen's University. She is now currently a research associate at Oxford University, looking at the issue of changing character of war. She received a master's and a doctorate at the University of Oxford, Balliol College. She also holds, as I said before, BA honors in political science from Queen's University in Canada. Her research interests include mercenaries, and she's going to be talking about those today, private military companies in particular, and the privatization of force. She also looks at the use of norms in regulating warfare and the relationship between international law and international relations. I think this is going to be a wonderful session. She's actually paid her dues. She taught for some time senior military officers at the UK Joint Services Staff and Command College, where she still, I think, provides lectures about the privatization of force. Her forthcoming Delphi paper on the regulation of the private security industry is coming out soon, as well as a book published by Oxford University Press on the norms against mercenaries, and I look forward to that book. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Sarah Percy.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much for all coming out today. Am I?
Yeah,
I think I'm hooked up. Yes. And thanks to Andy and Melinda and Nisha and the U of A Political Science Department for organizing to have me come today. As Andy mentioned, I've just recently written an Adelphi paper, which has just in the past couple of weeks come out on the subject of regulating the private security industry, and the talk I give today is going to be in part drawn from that paper. So if you get interested in it, It's hard to get individual copies of the Delphi papers, but there should be some nice free ones in the U of A library for you. So I'm going to talk today about the role of private force in conflict, and I'm going to look at it in a bunch of different parts of the world. I'm going to look at it mainly in Africa and the Middle East, partly because that's where we tend to see this sort of activity happening. I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is, but I'm specifically going to talk about the regulation of this industry, because it's not a particularly well-regulated industry, and that in itself is an interesting and important topic which is definitely worth examining further. So I'm going to start out by outlining what private force is, what manifestations of it we see. I'm going to talk about some of the reasons it needs regulation. Then I'll outline what the current regulatory environment is. So I'm going to look at the domestic, international, and informal rules which apply to the industry. And I'll talk about why those are inadequate. I'm going to turn a little bit to what this regulation perhaps should look like. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I think all of this matters, why I think it is actually a really important thing for us to look about. And hopefully that will come through as I proceed on through the talk. So what is the private military industry? You see this thrown around a lot, especially in the media at the moment. It seems to be the latest sexy thing to write articles about for journalists is mercenaries and this new private military industry. So basically, you can define it quite simply as it's just an industry that sells military and security services. It mainly sells them to the state and to other private actors. So media, corporations, natural resource extraction industries use private security companies quite often. There is, however, a problem of precise definition when we talk about the private military and the private security industry. It's very, very difficult to pin it down exactly. And that's partly because it provides a whole range of activities, and in a minute we'll talk about that, but it provides activities ranging from things like landmine clearance, which are pretty uncontroversial, right through things like military interrogation, which is pretty controversial. So that's part of the reason why it's difficult to define. The other reason why it's difficult to define is that the private military industry, the private security industry that we see in Iraq today, one of the things that they say about themselves is that they don't provide active combat services. So if you want to hire them to fight your war for you, they're not going to do that. And they're very specific about that. In fact, a lot of the companies, the majority of their employees don't carry arms. Only a small minority do. That said, there's a huge gray area out there between combat and non-combat. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're guarding an oil pipeline, and that's the thing that you've been hired to do. And you know there is a patrol, a band of people who are coming to attack that oil pipeline. Do you just sit at the oil pipeline and wait for them to come, or do you go out and go after them? And sometimes force which is used defensively can cause almost as much trouble as force which is used offensively. So even if you do sit there and wait for them to come, you're still going to shoot them if they come to the oil pipeline, and you're still going to kill them. So this is a very gray area, which we're going to talk about. The other real difficulty that happens in terms of definitions is we see a great deal of movement between the various sectors of this industry. So from traditional mercenaries to private security companies. And a fantastic example of that is one of the gentlemen I interviewed when I was doing the Adelphi paper was telling me that he was watching the news one night, and he'd been an official with the Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq, and he was watching the news one night, and he saw his security detail from a company being arrested in Equatorial Guinea as part of the coup attempt there a few years ago. So you do have employees that move from the legitimate end of the industry to the seriously illegitimate end of the industry, planning coups and things. And that makes it very difficult to define as well. So I'd say there are three main types of actor when we look at the broad scope of the private military industry. And the first of those are good old-fashioned traditional mercenaries. And we see these people most prominently in the 20th century, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And they're individuals or they're loosely organized groups. And they provide military services, including combat, which is important to emphasize, in exchange for payment for states or other actors. And they're not particularly choosy about their clients. In fact, if we look at the history of mercenary use through the 60s and 70s, they're remarkably unchoosy about their clients. They'll work for just about anybody who'll pay them, and they'll do just about anything. In the modern context, when these people have been used, in the 20th century and 21st century context, when they've been used, the use has tended to be covert. So if major states are involved in this, it's slipping money under the table, often to a third party or middleman before it gets to the mercenaries themselves. There are lots of great examples of this. The famous mercenaries of the 1960s were a Belgian, Bob Denard, and an Englishman called Mad Mike Hoare, who were heavily involved in the Congo. And then in the most recent example is Simon Mann's coup attempt in Equatorial Guinea, where Mark Thatcher, who's Margaret Thatcher's son, was involved allegedly as one of the financiers of that coup. Mercenaries still are a particular problem in West Africa, and one of the reasons why I think this topic is very important is we tend to focus a lot on the private security side of the industry present in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we forget that mercenaries are a major part of the current conflict situation in West Africa. And in fact, the UN has passed several resolutions saying that individual mercenaries moving from conflict to conflict in West Africa, sort of jumping from Cote d'Ivoire to Liberia to Sierra Leone, are actually fueling conflict in that region. So this still is a significant problem in Africa in its old-fashioned sense, in the sense that we tend to forget about. Private military companies are tightly organized companies. They have a clear corporate structure. A lot of them had websites, had promotional material. A couple of them tried to float